In 1810, a pound of sugar could cost an English worker a full day of wages. By 1900, workers were stirring it into tea several times a day. In less than a century, sugar moved from treasure to habit, from royal tables to factory lunch breaks, from locked cabinets to ordinary kitchens. But that change was not simple progress. It was built through conquest, plantation labor, Atlantic shipping, slavery, rebellion, and industrial power. Sugar looks innocent because it is white, small, and silent. But few foods have changed the world so violently. This is the story of how a tropical grass became a global obsession, how sweetness built empires, and how one of the most ordinary ingredients on earth came with one of the darkest histories in food. Sugar's story does not begin in England or France or on a Caribbean plantation. It begins much earlier, in the humid forests of New Guinea, thousands of years before the modern world had factories, refineries, or sugar bowls. There, people found a tall grass growing in the tropical lowlands. Its stalk was thick, fibrous, and plain-looking. But when they cut it open and bit into it, the plant released something rare in the ancient world: concentrated sweetness. For generations, that was all sugar was. No crystals, no trade routes, no empire. Just people chewing raw sugarcane for energy and pleasure, tasting sweetness directly from the stalk, before anyone knew it could become a commodity powerful enough to move ships across oceans. From New Guinea, sugarcane traveled slowly across the islands of Southeast Asia. It moved with migrants, farmers, traders, and memory. By around the 4th millennium before Christ, it reached the Indian subcontinent. And there, sugar changed from a plant into a product. Ancient Indian farmers did not only chew the cane, they crushed it. They collected the juice. They boiled it until it thickened. Then, they allowed it to harden into rough, brown crystals. That discovery mattered, because a stalk of cane rots. A crystal can be stored, carried, sold, taxed, and shipped. India had turned sweetness into something portable. From this moment, sugar was no longer trapped inside a plant. It could begin its long journey into medicine, trade, luxury, and eventually empire. When Greeks traveling east encountered sugar, they described it almost like a miracle. One famous description spoke of a reed that produced honey without bees. To people who knew sweetness mostly from fruit and honey, that idea sounded impossible. A grass that made sweetness. A plant that could imitate the work of bees. But even after the West learned about sugar, it remained rare. For centuries, it appeared in small quantities, in pharmacies and medical texts, not in ordinary kitchens. Doctors prescribed it for stomach problems, coughs, weakness, and other conditions they barely understood. For common people, sugar was too distant and too expensive to matter. It was not a daily food. It was medicine, curiosity, and luxury packed into tiny crystals. The people who truly expanded sugar's world were Arab farmers, traders, engineers, and chemists during the Islamic Golden Age. They improved irrigation. They refined boiling methods. They learned how to make sugar crystals cleaner, whiter, finer, and more stable. Sugarcane cultivation spread through Persia, Egypt, North Africa, Sicily, and parts of Spain, wherever climate and water made it possible. This was not yet the plantation world of the Caribbean, but it was the stage where sugar became more sophisticated, more valuable, and more connected to long-distance trade. Markets carried it. Physicians used it. Cooks experimented with it. Merchants understood that sweetness had power. By the time Europeans encountered sugar in the Eastern Mediterranean, it was already woven into cuisine, medicine, and commerce across the Islamic world. When European crusaders reached the Levant, they tasted sugar and carried stories of it home. For Europe, sugar became a symbol of the exotic East. Venice, sitting between Mediterranean trade routes and European markets, became one of the great sugar gateways. Venetian merchants imported raw sugar, refined it, and sold it at enormous markups. In medieval Europe, sugar was treated less like food and more like treasure. It was stored carefully, recorded in inventories, guarded by apothecaries, served by nobles who wanted their guests to understand one thing clearly. This household had money. Sugar was not only eaten, it was displayed. At royal banquets, it could be shaped into sculptures, castles, animals, and religious scenes. A sugar sculpture was a message, wealth so great it could be swallowed. For a long time, sugar's power came from scarcity. But scarcity was never enough for Europe. The problem was simple. Sugarcane loves heat and moisture. It does not grow in the cold fields of England. It does not thrive in northern France. It does not belong in Scandinavia. Europe wanted sweetness, but Europe did not have the climate to produce it at scale. That meant dependence on distant trade routes, Islamic merchants, Mediterranean middlemen, and unstable politics. For European rulers and merchants, dependence was weakness. If they wanted cheaper sugar, they needed warmer land. If they wanted more profit, they needed control. And in the 15th century, that search for control pushed European powers into the Atlantic islands. Portuguese and Spanish expansion into the Atlantic created the next stage of sugar history. Madeira, the Canary Islands, São Tomé. These islands became laboratories for a system that would later dominate the Caribbean. Forests were cleared, cane was planted, mills were built, ports were connected to fields. The goal was not local food. The goal was export. Everything pointed outward, toward European demand. On these islands, sugar stopped being a rare Eastern luxury and began becoming an Atlantic business. This is where the plantation model took shape. One crop, one owner class, one export market, one brutal demand for labor. It looked like agriculture from far away. Up close, it was an extraction machine. A plantation was not simply a large farm. A farm can feed a community. A plantation was designed to feed a market far away. It organized land, labor, time, and violence around a single profitable crop. Sugar made this system especially harsh because sugarcane is impatient. Once cut, cane begins to lose sweetness. It must be carried to the mill quickly. It must be crushed quickly. The juice must be boiled quickly. Every delay means less profit. That urgency shaped the rhythm of plantation life. Harvest season did not follow human limits. It followed the chemistry of the crop and the greed of the owners. The cane set the clock. The plantation forced people to live inside it. Making sugar was dangerous work. Cane had to be cut with sharp blades. Under tropical heat, the stalks were heavy. The fields were dense. The work was repetitive, exhausting, and timed against decay. At the mill, cane was fed into rollers that crushed out the juice. Those rollers did not care whether they caught cane or fingers. Then came the boiling house. Huge kettles of cane juice sat above roaring fires. The air filled with steam, smoke, and heat. The syrup had to be skimmed and transferred from one kettle to the next as it thickened. Burns were common. Exhaustion was normal. The white sugar that arrived in Europe looked clean, but it was born in sweat, smoke, and danger. As sugar profits rose, plantation owners searched for labor they could control completely. Saint-Domingue became one of the places where the future appeared early. Enslaved Africans were forced onto island plantations, and sugar production grew through violence. This was the terrible logic that would later cross the Atlantic at massive scale. The crop was profitable. The work was brutal. Owners wanted workers who could not leave, bargain, or refuse. So a business built on sweetness began to bind itself to human captivity. The Atlantic sugar system did not simply discover slavery after it became rich. Slavery helped make it rich. The islands were the rehearsal. The Caribbean would become the main stage. When Columbus returned to the Caribbean on his second voyage, he carried sugarcane cuttings across the ocean. It seemed like a small cargo. It was not. The Caribbean had what sugar wanted: heat, rain, fertile soil, and long growing seasons. European empires had what the sugar business demanded: ships, weapons, credit, and hunger for profit. Soon, cane spread across the Americas: Brazil, Barbados, Jamaica, Cuba, Martinique, Saint-Domingue. The names changed, but the pattern repeated. Clear the land, plant the cane, build the mill, force the labor, ship the sugar. In Europe, people saw sweetness arriving in barrels. In the Caribbean, entire islands were being reorganized around a crop that never stopped demanding more. By the 17th century, some Caribbean colonies had become sugar factories in everything but name. Barbados, small enough to seem insignificant on a map, became one of the most valuable colonies in the British world. Saint-Domingue became a jewel of the French Empire. Ports filled with barrels. Fields spread across hills and valleys. Mills ran under pressure. European merchants saw these islands as miracles of wealth. But the miracle was not natural. It was engineered. Land was taken. Forests were cleared. Indigenous societies had already been devastated by disease, conquest, and displacement. Then, millions of Africans were forced into the system to keep sugar moving. The Caribbean did not simply produce sugar. It was remade by sugar. The human cost was catastrophic. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, millions of Africans were captured, sold, forced onto ships, and transported across the Atlantic. Many did not survive the crossing. Those who did were sold again into plantation labor. Sugar plantations were among the deadliest places in the Atlantic world. The work was severe. Food was poor. Punishment was constant. Disease spread easily. Families were separated. Languages attacked. Names changed. And lives reduced to units of labor. For plantation owners, death was not always a failure of the system. Sometimes it was part of the calculation. If sugar profits were high enough, human beings could be treated as replaceable. That is the truth hidden inside the sugar bowl. This is the line that matters. Sugar did not merely benefit from slavery. Sugar helped drive slavery. The demand for sweetness made plantations wildly profitable. The profitability of plantations made enslaved labor central to Atlantic commerce, and Atlantic commerce made empires richer. The white crystal-linked bankers, merchants, shipbuilders, insurers, politicians, and planters into one system. A spoonful of sugar in London might be connected to a loan issued in a counting house, a ship leaving Bristol, a human being sold on the African coast, and a field in Jamaica where cane was cut under the sun. Sugar made violence distant, and once violence was distant, consumers could pretend it was not part of the product. The Atlantic sugar economy is often described as triangular trade. Europe sent manufactured goods to Africa. Africa was forced to supply captives to the Americas. The Americas sent sugar, molasses, and rum back to Europe. But calling it a triangle makes it sound too neat, too clean, too geometric. It was a machine. At one corner was capital. At another was captivity. At the third was plantation production. Sugar sat in the center, turning suffering into profit. Every barrel that crossed the ocean carried more than sweetness. It carried the logic of empire. Take land, control labor, move goods, hide the cost, and let consumers taste only the final product. By the 18th century, Britain had developed a powerful sweet tooth. Sugar consumption rose sharply. Tea, coffee, and chocolate were entering European life, and all three were bitter. Sugar changed them. It made tea softer, coffee easier, chocolate more luxurious. Among the wealthy, sugar remained fashionable. Among the middle classes, it became expected. Among workers, sweetened tea became cheap comfort and quick energy. This was not only a cultural change. It was economic strategy. Colonies produced sugar. Merchants sold it. Governments taxed it, protected it, and fought over it. The British tea table looked polite, but it rested on Caribbean fields. The empire did not only conquer through armies, it also conquered through appetite. This is what made sugar so powerful. It could turn suffering into comfort for someone who never saw the suffering. A worker in England could drink sweet tea during a long factory day and feel warmth, energy, and relief. But the sweetness in that cup might have come from a plantation where another worker had no freedom at all. The two lives were connected by trade, but separated by distance. That distance protected the conscience of the consumer. It allowed sugar to feel innocent. It allowed empire to feel normal. And it taught the modern world a pattern it still repeats. Make the pain happen far away. Make the product look clean. And make the buyers see only convenience. But sugar plantations also created something impious did not expect. Resistance. Wherever slavery existed, resistance existed. People slowed work. They broke tools. They escaped. They preserved memory, language, music, and belief under conditions designed to erase them. And in Saint-Domingue, the richest sugar colony in the French Empire, resistance became revolution. In 1791, enslaved people rose up against the plantation order. Fields burned. Mills stopped. Armies moved. For years, formerly enslaved people fought French, Spanish, and British forces. The world had seen many slave revolts, but this one did not end as a warning. It ended as a nation. Sugar had made Saint-Domingue wealthy. Revolution would make it Haiti. In 1804, Haiti declared independence. It became the first black republic in the modern world, and the first nation born from a successful slave revolution. For enslaved people across the Atlantic, Haiti was proof that the plantation system was not eternal. For European empires, it was a nightmare. France had lost one of the most profitable colonies on earth. Napoleon had dreamed of rebuilding a French empire in the Americas, with Caribbean sugar at its center. Now that dream was broken. Without Saint-Domingue, the economics of holding vast territories in North America changed. In 1803, France sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States. Sugar's collapse in one colony helped redraw the map of another continent. Empire planted cane and harvested revolution. Napoleon faced another problem. Britain's navy could cut France off from Caribbean sugar. If France wanted sweetness without depending on tropical colonies, it needed another source. That source was the sugar beet. European scientists had already discovered that beets contained the same sucrose found in cane. Napoleon pushed beet sugar production aggressively. Fields were planted. Factories were built. Research was funded. What began as a wartime necessity helped break the ancient monopoly of cane sugar. For the first time, a cold European field could compete with a tropical plantation. Cane versus beet. Colony versus factory. Caribbean island versus European farmland. This rivalry would drive production up and prices down. Sugar was moving toward the final stage of its transformation, from luxury to mass commodity. The Industrial Revolution accelerated everything. Steam-powered mills crushed cane faster. Railroads moved crops faster. Factories refined sugar at scales earlier centuries could not imagine. The crystals became whiter, finer, and more uniform. White sugar began to symbolize purity, progress, and modernity. But that whiteness also made forgetting easier. The rough brown crystals of ancient India still looked like something born from earth and labor. Modern refined sugar looked almost abstract, clean, weightless, detached from fields, ships, boilers, and bodies. As cane and beet competed, prices fell. As prices fell, sugar entered more kitchens. As it entered more kitchens, it changed what people expected food to taste like. The old luxury was becoming a daily assumption. By the late 19th century, sugar was everywhere in the industrial world. Jams, candies, baked goods, sweetened drinks. Cheap calories became useful calories. Factory workers, working long hours, needed quick energy, and sugar delivered it faster than almost anything else. Sweet tea, bread with jam, candies, and early soft drinks became part of working-class life. Industrial capitalism did not only use coal and steam, it used sweetness. Sugar kept bodies moving. It made harsh days more bearable. It made cheap food feel rewarding. And it helped build a new kind of consumer culture where pleasure could be mass-produced. The product that had once announced royal status now appeared in the hands of people who could never have afforded it centuries earlier. That was sugar's victory. It became ordinary. The 20th century took sugar even further. Soft drinks grew. Candy brands multiplied. Breakfast foods became sweeter. Food companies learned that sugar could create memory, craving, and habit. Later, new sweeteners, such as high fructose corn syrup, made sweetness even cheaper and easier to pour into industrial food. But the deeper pattern had already been established centuries earlier. Find sweetness. Scale it. Make it cheap. Hide the cost. Let the consumer taste only pleasure. The cost changed form across history. Sometimes it was land. Sometimes labor. Sometimes health. Sometimes dependency. But the question remained the same. Who pays for sweetness when sweetness becomes a system? That question is why sugar's history is not just about food. It is about power. Today, sugar is so common that it disappears into the background of life. A packet beside a cup, a spoon in tea, a crystal on a kitchen counter. But inside that crystal is a 10,000-year journey. New Guinea, India, the Islamic world, Venice, Madeira, the Canary Islands, Saint-Domingue, Barbados, Jamaica, Saint-Domingue, Haiti, Napoleon, beet fields, factories, empires rose around it. Millions suffered beneath it. Revolutions burned through it. And modern life absorbed it so completely that most people stopped seeing it at all. Sugar is not evil by itself. It is a plant, a molecule, a taste. But the history built around it reveals something uncomfortable about us. Human beings loved sweetness so much that they reorganized the world to obtain it. Sugar is sweet on the tongue, but bitter in history. If this story changed the way you see everyday food, subscribe to Food History Archive, because the things we eat are never just food. They are memory, empire, labor, violence, trade, and power.